This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. And welcome into episode number 145, the Huskies Warming House podcast, back in the middle of January this Sunday. A little bit later on Sunday, of course, because of some travel things. The NAHL gives us no rest, although as soon as I say that, I realize that Nick and I are both off next weekend when it comes to work for that. So that's exciting, I guess.
Is it Saturday or Sunday? It feels like it's one big day. Oh, it's right. It kind of is.
might be Wednesday. I don't even know. The voice you're hearing is Nick Maxon joining myself, Noah Grant. We were supposed to have Matt Cullen on this. No, I'm totally kidding. But of course, we are going to talk about him and other things related to men's hockey. They had an interesting week. We talked about how the CC Tigers were going to make some noise in the NCHC. We kind of just hoped it was going to be against someone else. Nonetheless, with that being said, women's hockey back in action. Tough weekend for them as well. Hockey Day Minnesota news and the opener of our show, and then Minnesota Wild stuff to close out the regular portion of the show. They had a pretty decent week, all things considered, increasing their gap on the Colorado Avalanche behind them. And then the extra ice session, we're going to stick with NHL news. Rumors about Matt Dumba maybe finally being moved for the 27,048th time. And then Vancouver, are they the biggest dumpster fire in the NHL? I think we're going to try to answer that question, but nonetheless, we start, as always, with Center Ice View News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Center Ice View News and Notes here, Noah, on this Sunday afternoon. Hey, it's a Vikings playoff Sunday, too. I'm ready to get heartbroken, so here we go. Well, it says more heartbreaking news, or maybe not so heartbreaking news. I'll be calling Hockey Day Minnesota here for St. Cloud women's hockey. That finally was made publicly available just a couple of days ago. For those who kind of don't, we'll shed a little window how this works. So this has been sort of been gaining traction for almost a month now. A lot of these, the big thing was essentially acquiring the rights from Big Ten Plus. So Big Ten Plus has an exclusivity agreement with the WCHA to stream a lot of their games. So for Bally's to be able to get it on their schedule, and then obviously getting the production crew, everybody else for that game takes time. So when I got the call, of course, you don't say no to Hockey Day. Super excited about it. It's St. Cloud State Women's against Bemidji State. We'll obviously dive into that exact matchup a little bit later, probably next week, but some important points on the board, and happy to be a part of that broadcast. That's really exciting. Yeah,
it is exciting, obviously. I'll be at home on the couch watching. But with that being said, I mean...
Cheek notes, yeah.
Yeah, I have actually funny, I have my Hockey Day Minnesota 10-year anniversary shirt up here from Duluth, Minnesota back in 2016. So
Nice.
certainly has been a really cool event that has continued on through that tradition. I think the first one back in 2007, 2006, 2007. Yep. So a pretty good event that has continued to grow over the years and become really a mainstay if you're a Minnesota hockey fan in general. So I think it's really cool that you're going to be a part of that, obviously. If I don't sound massively excited, it's because I knew well before our listeners did. So, of course, we've hashed that out, and it's really exciting, of course. But it's almost, maybe it's from my perspective of things too. It's almost no surprise to me that you get an opportunity like that because I know you and know what you're capable of, and I'm going to stop tooting your horn now because you look confused at this praise.
Yeah,
So
exactly. It's like, what the hell are you doing?
yeah,
I don't have the money to pay you for this free advertising, so knock it off.
Yeah, it's not, we pay to do this show, so
Seriously.
I'll take anything I can get. But yeah, Hockey Day Minnesota, obviously a big chunk of change as well, and a big matchup for the Huskies women's team, as we'll talk about when we get to them this upcoming week. Of course, they play Ohio State, which should be interesting. But the week after, like you mentioned, Hockey Day Minnesota, Bemidji, crucial points on the line after what happened last weekend.
Certainly is. Let's continue with some crucial points being taken by the Seattle Kraken. In fact, holy cow, couple of things, actually. One you mentioned here, Noah, and that is their first regulation loss they handed to the Boston Bruins on home ice for the season. That's their first home ice loss in regulation since April of 2022.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
And what was it, the longest or the best road streak or best road swing
7.
ever?
It was the first team in NHL history to sweep a road, basically a road trip of 7 or more games. So they went 7-0. That's Seattle Kraken for real.
Is that good?
No, it's pretty shit, actually. But I mean, Vancouver has, entered the chat, so we'll see.
Yeah, they might have went 0-7. I'm not sure.
Oh, geez, if they even bother to show up. So my gosh, I mean, again. I'm glad that's our extra ice session because
they're not the Wolverines here. They at least play their games.
That's true. So, speaking of teams who do play games, the Red Wings did beat Toronto 3 days ago. The first time that they beat Toronto in almost 4 years, February 1st, 2019. Let's just say that may have woken the beast up a bit for Toronto, who had been kind of sliding a bit. Now run 9 in a row since then. So yeah, the Red Wings. Also a bit of a disappointing season. They looked early that they were going to maybe make a push to be in the bubble. It looks like, there still technically is a chance, but with all the ground they have to make up, it's a tall task.
Yeah.
So they're looking more like sellers than buyers at the deadline. And most recent reports have said that they're going to be essentially reevaluating all of their talent here as they get towards the trade deadline and certainly as they get into the free agency period, again, this upcoming off season. So pretty sad story for the Red Wings. I thought they would be a bit better than they were this year.
Yeah, they might be a year off. I think the same story with Ottawa, too. We expected a little bit more of them, and they haven't quite made the jump, so we'll have to see the Eastern Conference staying relatively pat. I thought we were going to get a little bit more of a shakeup. The Devils have provided some intrigue, obviously, but I think other teams...
Florida Panthers are not the right way.
Yeah. They just cannot catch a break down in the Sunrise area there, but... Nonetheless, 2 more topics here already here in the weekly roundup. Very quick one here this week. The Boston Bruins, will circle back to them. The only signing of the past week, Pavel Zacha, 4-year extension, $4.75 million average annual value, 25 points in 42 games for him this season. So a nice little pickup for the Bruins, kind of a nice little resurgence. Maybe one of the few guys that has left the Red Wings and found success, usually, or Red Wings, the Devils, sorry.
The Devils.
And most players would have wanted to stay in New Jersey given the year that they've had. But a guy that has flourished. If you're not going to be with the Devils, I suppose being with the Bruins is
not a bad trade-off.
Yeah, as long as you're just worried about the on-ice stuff. If you're in the front office, run. With that being said, speaking of front office things, we'll discuss this in our extra ice session. Our first injury, Tanner Pearson, done for the year after his third hand surgery of the season. Teaser for what's to come in the extra ice session. Vegas's Mark Stone, week to week with an upper body injury. Montreal's Brendan
break. Mark Stone, my gosh,
he just it's kind of been him. Great player when he's on the ice, but certainly has been bitten by the injury bug in recent years.
Seasons,
yeah. Same with Brendan Gallagher. Montreal out for at least 6 weeks with a lower body ailment, and the final one, Toronto's TJ Brodie on injured reserve with a rib injury. And welcome into the main portion of the show. Noah Grant alongside Nick Maxon here in the middle of January, smack dab on the 15th here. And Nick, NCAA hockey, some interesting news. I don't think as crazy of a week as we normally have. I'm really excited. I can't remember if it's next week or the week after. We have no weekday games before the weekend sets. That means Hockey East isn't doing their thing. Atlantic Hockey isn't doing their thing. We'll finish a game on Saturday and then we won't play till the following Friday anywhere in the country. That's cool.
Okay.
So I think that's in a couple weeks. I was looking through that and I'm like, there's no way. There's no way. But with that being said, before we start the main portion of the show, of course, Nick and I kind of briefly mentioned in the early portions here, both of us, an off week for us as far as NAHL work is concerned. Nick, of course, you were in America's wasteland. You were back in North Dakota, down in Bismarck. It was a split for you guys, shootout win the first night and then a loss last night, which not complaining on the Toro side of things, but personally, though, I was going to say it was nice to have you back in the state, but I don't want to lie to our viewers. So how was it?
Don't do that.
Coming back to the capital city and seeing the capital city Kitty Cats?
It didn't start very well. So, when you have those travel stories that you just kind of go, if, it's almost like if no one recorded it, would everybody believe it? This is one of those. So we check into the hotel and I'm walking to the room, get to the door, put the key in, open the door. The first thing I see is 3 to 4 pizza boxes on the floor. So at that point, I'm going, oh, okay, maybe they just forgot to get the garbage. I look to the left towards the bathroom. Yeah. There's towels all over. I go a little bit further, and the beds aren't even made. Looks like someone just popped out of bed. And so
was there luggage in there?
There was not luggage.
Oh.
So I didn't know. I was like, well, this is a first. So I go back to the front desk, not the front door, and just simply said in the nicest way possible, I'm like, well, there's 2 things. Either someone's in this room still or you haven't cleaned it yet. I didn't know how else to phrase it, it sounding like a total dick. So
yeah,
they gave me a new room. New room was fine, but I wasn't the only one. So the athletic trainer for the North Iowa Bulls actually had a skin reaction to
no way
a chemical. So looked like she swallowed a bowling ball with her eyeball. It was not good.
I guess if I had to think about, I only have one story related to check-in. Of course, you had to wait for your check-in. Actually, when you were here and not doing the games with me against Aberdeen, we had to wait until basically after the game, essentially based on timing. But
yeah,
I think the best story that I can remember, we went down to Florida my junior year for a school trip or something, kind of carving through the southeast there. And we get to Florida, and we finally get to our hotel, right? It was a long bus ride. It's like 75 hours each way with stops, just based on like the routes that we were taking and the stops that we had. So obviously long bus ride, finally getting into Florida and getting to our hotel. And we had one of the kids in our class with us, and he gets in the hotel room, and the first thing he's got to do is he's got to fire off a number 2, right? Like it's been a long road trip. He's doing whatever. So he does his thing, right? Looks around, no plunger.
Oh no.
So they just get in the room. There's no plunger. So now he's got to go down to the front desk. He's got to ask for a plunger, right? Like he's got it. He needs it. So he goes, starts, doing it, gets the plunger, unceremoniously starts doing his thing. They can't get the toilet unclogged. They had to move rooms coming into the hotel. So note to self when hotels are giving you crap, sometimes you can give it right back. But with that being said, circling back towards
all I can hear in my voice is oh, geez, what's the actor's face in Jurassic Park? Well, that's one big pile of shit.
Well, speaking of that, though, the Big Ten, I don't know if you would describe it as that, but the parity has certainly been there. 3 teams tied at 24 points for second in this conference here. And this weekend, of course, was a result of that. Ohio State traveling to Michigan. OSU a 7-2 victory on the first night against the Wolverines, who responded with a 4-2 victory of their own in night number 2. Penn State traveling to Michigan State. These 2 teams split earlier in the season. Michigan State winning 3-2 in overtime and then 5-4 in a shootout. Officially a tie, but a shootout victory for MSU. Same with Minnesota. Officially a tie against Notre Dame, but winning 3-2 technically in the shootout. And then also winning 3-0 the next night. So the only game that did not end up in a sweep of sorts, I guess, was the OSU Michigan series, although Penn State and Minnesota both earning ties in their respective matchups against Michigan State and Notre Dame. And the U.S. under-18 team, like you mentioned, that kicked the crap out of Wisconsin 6-1. It's interesting, though, this Badgers team is not totally far off. We'll talk a little bit, I think, about standings a little bit. I kind of have a link in here this week that we can kind of touch on some of the other conferences outside of the NCHC and kind of take a look. There's some intrigue here. The big reason that I pulled that up was to look at some Hockey East stuff and see where groups were at in that regard. But There's certainly been a lot of intrigue around the NCAA, so we'll get to that. But yeah, are you surprised that Wisconsin
No,
lost?
I mean, no. It's interesting because, you know, wasn't there an ejection in that game too?
Yeah, one of the Wisconsin players
Yeah,
had a suspension. Yeah,
like like a elbowing call, I think, or
yeah.
something like that. Some kind of flying chicken wing. And
Well, if you got beat by a bunch of kids, wouldn't you be mad too?
well, I thought Wisconsin would be used to it by now. I mean, they've been.
Oh,
Oh, I mean, it's been. Let's just say it's been a very rocky year. And it's weird because when you go into some of the junior teams, you see all the commits that they have. You would think, how is this team not better? I mean,
yeah,
we talk about curious cases in the podcast all the time, Noah, and Wisconsin truly is to me like the most curious case in college hockey the last couple of seasons. Right? Yes, they had the year with Cole Caulfield. He almost single-handedly carried them to an NCAA tournament, but we kind of had a feeling that things would maybe taper off a little bit with his departure to the NHL, but not as much as it has. I mean, there's dumpster fires in the NHL, but there's also a dumpster fire in terms of by Wisconsin standards. I mean, they used to be a very prolific,
yeah.
program, and now they're kind of becoming a doormat. I mean, my brain just doesn't want to believe that Wisconsin hockey is at that kind of level.
Yeah.
You know?
It's kind of interesting. It's been a weird year. You want to talk about dumpster fires? I was looking at the current NCHC standings compared to our preseason predictions.
Yeah. Oh
Ooh,
boy.
yeah, and the NCHC's media predictions for that matter. I mean, we had one spot flipped in number 1 and number 2, but everybody else was kind of in the same boat as
Same
us,
boat.
and we was wrong.
I blame
CCH,
Max Beach. The Bulldogs just screwed everything up.
that's fair. As long as Max Beach is unhappy, we're all happy. CCHA 2.0, Ferris State winning 4-0 on the first night, and then losing 4-1 to Lake Superior State, only their 4th win of the season. The Lakers disrupting Ferris's little run there. So
Yikes. Yeah.
yeah, CCHA had some interesting things here. Bowling Green swept Bemidji State 4-2 and 5-2. Michigan Tech winning 2-0 in night number 1, but then losing 3-2 to the Tommies in night number 2 by a score of 3-2. You can almost maybe feel this was coming, but Michigan Tech has really dropped off the table in the past couple of weeks here. They were a team that I picked to win in a couple weeks ago. I picked them to probably win the CCHA, and now I believe they're sitting in 3rd or 4th. I think it's 4th right now.
I think, yeah.
And really with a big point spread, they have kind of put themselves 6 or 7 points out of that first place spot. So
in 3rd actually, but
yeah.
28 points. Bowling Green has really secured 35 at top Minnesota State after their weekend at 30 points.
Yeah.
Bemidji State also has faltered a bit too. They're at 25, but in a home ice position. So
yeah, so we'll run through those obviously as well too. Like we said, some standing stuff after we get through some scores. Clarkson traveling to Harvard on Friday, and Clarkson a bit of an upset here, 4-1 for them. They're sitting, I believe, 7th in Hockey East right now, or sorry, ECAC. Harvard then had St. Lawrence, 5-0 win for them on Saturday. Clarkson had Dartmouth, and it was 5-4. This Dartmouth team that is sitting last in the ECAC and Hockey East is just giving teams scares left and right here. Otherwise, non-conference game on Saturday, Cornell traveled to BU, and BU won 4-3 in that one. Hockey East here, our smorgasbord of fun as always. UMass beating BU or losing to BU, sorry, on Wednesday. That one was in BU. 6-2 was the final there. Merrimack traveling, holy smokes, Noah, hosting Providence. Everybody keep up. Okay, this was our only weekend matchup that we had in the initial thing. Yeah, sorry, people. Providence traveled to Merrimack. Providence won 8-3 the first night, and Merrimack won 3-0 the second night. So a split for both of those teams that probably doesn't help or hurt anybody in that regard there. Both those teams probably could have used a split out of that weekend series, all things considered. Northeastern traveling to UConn on Saturday. Northeastern winning 4-3. This was a very tight contest here between two teams vying for some space out there in Hockey East. New Hampshire plays UMass, or they played on Sunday, and New Hampshire won 4-1. This UMass team is bad.
yeah,
Like, I thought
actually,
they've really struggled. I was kind of surprised when I looked back at the standings. They've dropped down to the 3rd worst in Hockey East.
they're
It's
23rd in the pairwise. So they came into the season, weren't they? At least in the top 15 in the polls,
Yeah.
and hung around
Yeah.
maybe 9-10, and they've kind of dropped off the table, for lack of a better phrase.
So that was what we had included. The extra one I added for this week, UMass Lowell traveled to Maine. UMass Lowell won 2-1 in the first night, but Maine winning 5-3 in the second night. Maine has disrupted a couple of people's weekends this season as well. Same with another team in Atlantic hockey. Bentley has done some damage. They swept Niagara 6-3 and 6-1. And AIC played a single game set against Vermont, and they won that one 4-0 over the Catamounts out east. So the other game that I included here, BC traveled to Sacred Heart for a non-conference game. BC won 3-2 in overtime at the newly minted Martyr Family Arena, seating 4,000. UConn and St. Thomas are the other two teams who are going to get arenas very soon, but this was the first one that we saw from Sacred Heart. Well, yeah, but they're getting a new team, so it's like,
well, I mean, come on, still a new arena.
I mean, where was St. Thomas's new arena when they had built their team? You know.
They still haven't figured that out, too, which I think is funny.
Yeah. Regardless, though, Sacred Heart's new building is beautiful.
Very nice. Yes.
It kind of reminds me of Miami, Ohio's a little bit, but I love on the one side they've got these big open windows, essentially, that you can see across from the concourse. Lets in a lot of natural light during the day, and, of course, a good view at night. And then the other side, press box seating around the concourse and, you know, kind of the leveled suites and sort of things. It's a beautiful facility.
It is. And again, 4,000 seats. That's sort of, I think, the norm now, between 4,000 and 5,000. Again, Mullet Arena, minus a renter that has screwed everything up, for the owner, would be around 4,500 to 5,000. And, I think for the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center, I think technically it seats 6,600 if it were full. It's over 6,000.
They were at capacity last night, and they were at like 5,103. So
51? Okay.
Yeah, it's 51. It's like 51, like 5,150, I think, is the true capacity, but they usually don't fill I thought it was closer to 6,000 too, and then I found out that it's actually closer to 5,000. But we'll talk about attendance, by the way, for St. Cloud when we get to that point as well too. But a beautiful building. I thought tough that they lost in overtime. BC, that's a lot of pressure coming into that building. No one trying to get a victory, so good for them. So you mentioned Mullet Arena, by the way. 3 more scores to recap here. Mankato traveled to Arizona State and swept them 3-1 and 5-0. And then Long Island played host to Quinnipiac on Saturday, traveled to Princeton on Friday, and they lost them both 5-2, both scores against both of those clubs. So what's on tap in the Big Ten and the rest of the college hockey world? Notre Dame travels to Penn State. Ohio State travels to Wisconsin. Michigan will travel to Minnesota, and Michigan State is off. CCHA 2.0, Bowling Green, St. Thomas, Thursday, Friday matchup. That one's in St. Thomas. Lake Superior State travels to Mankato. Tech travels to Ferris, and Northern Michigan at Bemidji. ECAC, Providence will travel to Princeton on Tuesday. Quinnipiac gets Cornell on Friday, while Princeton will get Cornell on Saturday, and Quinnipiac will have Colgate in the same matchup the next night. Hockey East, Northeastern, a home and home against Merrimack. Maine will travel to BU. UConn, a home and home against UMass, and New Hampshire against UMass Lowell. I threw that one in there because UMass Lowell is kind of on the bubble in their own conference and sorts of things, so they need a couple of victories strung together quick. And then New Hampshire will play UMass again on Sunday. We won't have that score, but kind of a weird little schedule for them there. Nothing to discuss in Atlantic hockey that I thought was notable. And independent-wise, Lindenwood travels to Long Island. That'll be a nice little matchup with the Independents. And RIT will travel to the Sun Devil State and ASU. So we talked about the standings here, Nick, so why don't we talk about them? RIT, the aforementioned team, leading Sacred Heart by 9 points in Atlantic hockey. They seem like maybe the team to beat. I thought it was going to be Sacred Heart, but RIT has really kind of pulled away as of recent. AIC, a couple points behind, and then that's pretty much it for the top three. Maybe Mercyhurst could do some damage, but that conference tournament kind of always gives some intrigue because really anybody has a chance, I guess, to be fair, when it comes to Atlantic hockey. Big Ten, Minnesota, of course, taking the cake, 10-point lead over the next three: Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State, really your top four in the mix there.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, OSU and Penn State, 2 less games played than the Spartans of Michigan State. So they have a chance to do some damage as they move on through the season. But I'm curious, Nick, since we're talking about it, Minnesota will finish number 1 in that conference, no doubt about it. What's the order of the top 4 after?
Ooh, it's not going to be Michigan State. I think Michigan State rounds out the bottom 4 in that. I think they take 4. And I think it'll be Penn State, then Ohio State. I think it's Minnesota, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan State.
So I am going out on a limb here. I'm going to say Penn State at 2. I'm going to say Michigan State at 3, and I'm going to say OSU at 4. I think this Spartans team has a little bit more left in the tank than you're giving them credit for. Now, I agree with you in the games played. I think that's the one thing that really hurts them is you have an extra weekend that you lose, essentially.
And this weekend they'll make up for it because Michigan State off.
Yeah, OSU has kind of been up and down here, but this Spartans team has really pushed in the last month and a half, and I think that they're going to give teams fits here. But yeah, it's anybody's guess. I think in the Big Ten should be interesting. No secret who's probably going to have home ice a little bit here. I forget how that works. The first team has a bye, right?
Yes,
and then it's 2, 3, 4 has home ice, and they play 5, 6, 7. Notre Dame is. Yep. I guess technically not out of the question with games played if something crazy happens and they go on a run.
String a bunch together to get it to happen, and I don't know. Like they've been a very widely inconsistent team this year.
Yeah. Same with Michigan, who's at 15 points. They have 4 games in hand on Michigan State, 2 on everybody else. How are they still top 10 in the pairwise?
That's a great question. I don't know. Like it is, in a similar sense, you could have almost asked the same, thing about St. Cloud last year. Because it was their non-conference that kind of buoyed them because of that very difficult. And then, with some of the teams they played, they stayed, in that top 15. So it kind of buoyed them. I think Michigan's almost being the beneficiary of that same kind of thing. Yeah. But yeah, looking past their non-conference schedule, they've been bad. They've been not good. They've been really bad in conference. So right now they are,
4, 6, basically 4, 6, and 1 in conference. Not great.
They're Jack holding onto the door and they're about to let go.
Wow.
They're just barely bobbing.
Well, let's talk about some teams barely bobbing here. The CCHA 2.0 has offered a lot of intrigue. I think Ferris at number 5 is out, but Bemidji State they might have a home spot. Those two might battle for a home spot, but other than that, it's hard to see any of them going anywhere. Although they do have 2 games in hand or 4 games in hand on Tech, State, and Bowling Green, respectively. Mm-hmm. So Michigan Tech, has really faltered, like you mentioned. They're at 28, like you mentioned. Minnesota State at 30, Bowling Green at 35. I guess Bowling Green kind of seems like the consensus pick here a little bit, although Mankato certainly has a bid. I think Tech is probably out at this point for trying to get to that point. Although they could, if they get a victory in their next 2, I mean, that pushes them up. I don't know what the point breakdown is for the CCHA. I apologize.
It's a 3-point system.
Just like the NCHC. So yeah, I mean, if Michigan Tech earns a sweep, in fact, we just mentioned who they are playing next week. Tech is traveling to Ferris.
In a Bowling Green, which mind you has also been very up and down. If they get swept, they're right back in it. So it's not out of the question. I would think if anything, Ferris State's probably sort of out of it. Northern Michigan for sure. 6, 7, and 8 are definitely out of contention.
Yeah. How about Northern Michigan's fall recently? By the way, 4-7 in the conference, 4 and 7 in the conference, and they've had to win 3 of those in overtime.
They can't score. In fact, they're the second worst goal scoring team in the conference, behind Lake Superior. Even St. Thomas has scored more goals than Northern Michigan. If that brings it to light a little bit, my goodness.
Yeah, they've lost 6 of their last 9 since essentially November 12th. So yeah, it has not been great. The losses against Bemidji, Mankato, Tech, Ferris, and then swept by Mankato last weekend has not been great for Northern Michigan as of recent. I thought they were a team that kind of almost maybe was going to be a top 3 team for a while there based on the way that they were trending. EC, Quinnipiac, and Harvard are pretty much the only 2 teams. Maybe throw Cornell and Princeton in there if you want to make it interesting. But I guess the ECAC, really what has kind of come out of that is the tournament time has sometimes yielded somebody that's not the top 2 teams, right? So you could maybe see a conference tournament winner that could make some damage and make the tournament. Hockey East, Merrimack at 30, Northeastern at 28, UConn at 27, BU and Providence at 26. I would say your top 4 all have a good crack. And then it's UMass Lowell at 20. So this Merrimack team, I mean, they're still staying pat. They're still winning Hockey East right now. And they have a game to 3 games in hand on various respective opponents in the top 5. So, I mean, is it fair that they're as high up in the pairwise as they are?
Yeah, but I mean, even if they make the dance, I don't see them as a giant threat. And I know I say that probably with a big, Western college hockey bias, but at the end of it, they're a team that hasn't really been there in a while, right, Noah? So to me,
Yeah.
they'll be judged on their performance and, especially come conference playoff. And if they're still in that mix in the NCAA tournament, not saying that they're a bad team, but they're certainly an inexperienced team. That's for sure.
Yeah, Arizona State in the independent wise 11-14. Alaska Fairbanks 11-9. Actually, the best winning percentage of any team in the independent group. So that's kind of interesting to look at. And of course, the last conference, the NCHC, we will definitely be getting to that. So let's head on over to the NCHC and talk a little bit about what they're going to bring, and then we'll talk polls and pairwise as usual. NCHC roundup here from the past week. Miami traveled to Denver, and I don't know why they bothered. They were outscored 14-0 on the weekend, 7-0 finishes both nights. I mean, I don't say that to be mean, but like, let's be honest, like that's an ass kicking.
Yeah.
Western Michigan traveled to North Dakota. I love it. 4-0 victory in night number 1. And then it was the Grand Forks native Caleb Johnson, his first start in 600 days, his last with the Minnesota Wilderness and the Null, and his last game, of course, a state tournament with Grand Forks Central in high school in that building at Ralph Engelstad. 7-6 was the final. Western Michigan sweeping North Dakota. I was looking at this, Nick. We'll get to the standings, of course, but long story short, North Dakota is 1 regulation win, and they're 2 overtime finishes away from being tied in points with Miami.
Yeah.
Wow. Minnesota Duluth traveling to Omaha, a heartbreaker in night number 1, 3-2, losing in that one on pretty egregious turnover and a shot 5-hole at Max Veach, of course, loved on Twitter. And then 6-1 Omaha kicking butt in night number 2. So this Omaha team is surprising a little bit more than we anticipated. Their conference play,
I thought surprising though, because Duluth is bad.
Well, I thought their non-conference play for Omaha was really up and down and really, was hard to read. And then come conference time, and Omaha's always kind of done this, I guess, where they were more middle of the pack, but they've kind of disrupted a little bit. Like the only team to go in and sweep North Dakota the one year they won the Penrose, in Grand Forks. So, they're making the case. They pushed right behind St. Cloud, actually vaulting Colorado College in the standings. So just like we predicted, right?
Exactly.
Colorado College traveling to St. Cloud State, of course, CC, a 4-2 victory in the first night, 4-0 for St. Cloud State in night number 2. So attendance in the first night, Nick, was 3,764. I know that Huskies games have predominantly hovered around 3,800, 4,000, especially on that Friday night.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, maybe I'll just pose the question, do you think that it's almost a bit of a travesty that a top 5 team in the country is not selling out every weekend at home?
A little bit.
I think so too.
And granted, some of that has to do with the opponent. And what I mean by that is we know, and we've been praising the CC Tigers on this podcast before the season. We sort of said, hey, watch out, this team is good, right? I think the fan base is still in this notion that CC still like the bottom feeder. And granted, if that's North Dakota, I think the building is obviously much fuller. We'll see. I'm assuming with the Matt Cullen retirement, we'll touch on that, I'm sure, later, was obviously much fuller for that. But, at the end of it, it is. And I'm going to call out the students a little bit, the dog pound. And I say
I think they've been the best, actually, out of everybody.
Here's what I say. I would like to see more of them consistently. There's always the group that's in that lower level that's always there causing a ruckus, and they're great. For that campus to be able to walk from the dorms or the apartments to go to a game, I don't know why there's not more there. I don't know. I kind of wish there was a bigger student section. And that's me coming from upbringing, and I'm going to piss off a lot of people, the Gopher upbringing. I remember going, post North Stars, pre-Minnesota Wild, where
old WCHA,
WCHA, when literally to get a ticket to the Gophers game was almost impossible. and, learning some, shall we say, some English and other life stories from the crowd chants also from the student section. It was a great educational thing at 12 to 13 years old. It was great. So,
well, you talk about home ice advantage too, right? And, St. Cloud, especially this weekend, which I would hope it would be packed this weekend. You talk about a Huskies team, if they want a shot at the Penrose this weekend, they need some help from the hometown faithful. So St. Cloud did take a lead in this one. The only goal in period number 1, Grant Cruikshank, his 14th of the season. Andre Treball, Dylan Anhorn, again, the likely suspects, right? Contributing for a goal there. Now, period number 2, 5-on-3, a slap shot, absolutely wired top cheddar glove side from Tyler Coffey. He's got a great release. Chase Foley, Stanley Cooley, the assists, and then on the 5-on-4 afterwards. So they scored right away on the 5-on-3, like about 5 or 6 seconds in. Hunter McCown, his 14th of the season from Ryan Beck and Noah Laba right after. This one kind of was a zone entry that maybe deflected off of a turnover. I can't remember if it was a zone entry, if it was a turnover right inside the blue line, but nonetheless, it was a shot right in the middle of the ice. It went off the foot of, I think it was Cronulla in front, the defender, and just maybe redirected a little bit through a screen. And I think there was a lot of talk about, St. Cloud and their defensive structure in this hockey game. And a lot of people said that second period was a poor period for St. Cloud. They were in control the first half. They took those 2 penalties, a couple of timely goals from CC, a couple of bounces. Obviously, that first shot from Coffey was a beautiful shot. You can say Castor should have had it maybe, but I mean, it was nice puck movement down low, and it was a good release upstairs. But then CC found their legs, right? The Tigers had a really good pushback, similar to what you would see if you suddenly take a 1-goal lead after being down 1, in quick succession. The Tigers, like we said, they have really good pushback. So I think a lot of people, like you said, have this notion that CC was going to roll over and play dead, right? And that's not what this team does. Now, speaking of defensive breakdowns, this second goal by Tyler Coffey from Ethan Strachey and Noah Laba, this was a defensive breakdown. Brendan Bushy got caught puck watching, essentially, and it was a weak side pass and a beautiful one-timer for CC to really kind of break the game open. That one's a backbreaker, right? Barely over a minute into a period. That's where I think defensive structure didn't look great. Maybe in period number 3. And of course, St. Cloud was trying to push back a little bit too in this one. Noah Prokop with the empty netter from Connor Mayer, and then Joey Molinar with the extra attacker. His first of the season from Zach Okabe and Spencer Meyer with a minute and 1 second left gave us the score that we had. But shots by period, 21-6 in favor of St. Cloud. The Huskies did everything but solve Caden Mbereko more than one time. I mean, he was electric. We'll get to him in a second, obviously, as he exited that game. CC out shooting 11-9 in period number 2, and the Huskies 14-7 in period number 3 for a 44-24 total. So, it's interesting. I think a lot of people, like I said, had this idea that the Huskies played poorly. CC was 2 for 2 on the power play, which we'll talk about the PK, which has definitely been a sore spot for the Huskies here. 25 for 58 in the draw, so 43%. And Jackson Castor had an 870, stopped 20 of 23. Caden Mbereko stopped 26 of 27 for a 963. He got hit in the face mask with like 3 minutes left in period number 2 and actually broke about 3 or 4 teeth. Returned the next night to start, but had to go to the dentist. Matt Vernon, of course, NHLer Mike Vernon's son, 16 stops on 17 shots in relief for a 941. But well, let's start with the defensive side of things here, maybe particularly the penalty kill. Did you think that, defensive structure was poor for the Huskies? And moreover, you give up the 5-on-3 goal, poor bounce on the other penalty kill that you had. The special teams has kind of let this Huskies teams down on the shorthanded side of things. But I think it maybe took a lot more than that, where the Huskies games have not so much been a poor penalty kill. Look at Miami, for example, but it's been poor penalty kills at an inappropriate time. Like, you can have a poor penalty kill percentage and be a good hockey team, or you can have a great one, for example, but the PK goals against you give up are inopportune or in quick succession and put you on your back foot.
And let's not add that the shorthanded goals for St. Cloud State. Now, the reason why I bring that up, Noah, is that it kind of gives us a picture of what St. Cloud is actually trying to do on the penalty kill, right? And it kind of, to me, seems like they're over pursuing the puck a little bit. And when you over pursue, especially in the walls, what's wide open? Middle of the ice, it's the house. Now,
especially on a big ice sheet.
Especially on a big ice sheet. Yeah. And I think one thing, and granted, I'm not hockey coach by anything, but if anything, to me, I think you got to close the gaps a little bit. I know that St. Cloud likes to skate. I know they like to try to force the puck carrier into bad areas of the ice, make them make decisions, and maybe try to trick them into essentially a poor decision, right? That's the whole idea when you're, that aggressive, especially with puck pursuit on the puck carrier. But the one thing that is the negative of that is you have a Colorado College team that's well coached, that knows how to move it away from pressure. If you can get that puck east to west and on the weak side, you've got a lot of room, and then your PK structure starts to break down just that way. And I think for St. Cloud, I think they just got to simplify it. And I think really it comes down to, just kind of clogging lanes and maybe not. I don't want to say you don't want to be as aggressive, but maybe just being smarter in your routes and more than anything, making sure that the sticks are in the right spot. And, if anything, making sure that if you're going to give up a pass, it's not through the seam, it's not through the middle. Try to keep the puck to the perimeter. So maybe that kind of adjustment. But as you mentioned too, you gave up the 5-on-3. That's tough for any PK, right? But then it was 61 seconds later in the 5-on-4. It was not. It was quick, right? So then they gave up the 5-on-4. That's a penalty kill you got to have. That's a PK you got to have. And if you're able to get out of that, only giving up one, it's a tie hockey game, maybe we're talking about a different result for Friday. And maybe it's 6 points on the weekend instead of 3 for St. Cloud State. Yeah. So I'm not as concerned about the 5-on-3. Again, that's a tough order. Again, big ice sheet, lots of room for the skill players to have. But again, it's that 5-on-4, the successive penalty kill. That's the one that you have to be better at.
Yeah, kind of a gut punch. Even the even strength goal to open up period number 3 really puts you on your back foot too. And I think all weekend where the frustration really wasn't necessarily so much in the defensive structure, because I don't know that CC threatened the middle a ton. But what they did do is they won a lot of 50-50 pucks along the half wall, and they forced St. Cloud defenders to throw pucks away, right? And it wasn't crisp, clean passes out of the zone or clean zone exits out the glass. It was suddenly, you're hemmed in your own zone. The puck is cycled back in your corner. Defenseman is under duress type of things. And the forecheck was really strong for CC, and you could tell that they made
forecheck. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, well, they do this year, and they made the intention, and we're going to talk about the CC team as well. Give them credit, right? Like we predicted them to finish 6th in the NCHC. They could have a home ice spot this year. I mean, was
it 6th or 5th?
6th.
6th.
Yeah.
Okay.
We picked Duluth to finish 5th.
That's right.
Which still might be off base, which is crazy. Nonetheless, so another thing was kind of brought up about Caden Barrico, the pegs coming off, a la Matt Murray in the NHL, Spencer Knight a couple years ago against the Huskies. And I was kind of wondering this, maybe just to pose the question. I didn't think it was really an issue, but in general, are we seeing like a technical side of goaltending where that combined with how nets have always been, where goaltenders are just using a lot of power to push off? I think we can all agree Matt Murray in the NHL has some gamesmanship going on.
He does, for sure.
But do you think other goalies are kind of getting caught out by this and they're really not intentionally doing it? They have a powerful push off and they're using the net to their advantage and the pegs are not holding?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the conversation is, well, how do you manage it? It's so tough as the referee crew to be able to point at a goaltender and literally with a straight face go, I know you absolutely did that on purpose. The net comes off the pegs, right? A strong push can do that. Again, for people to know the pegs, especially in the show, they're like rubber. They're like an acrylic. So they bend, right? The fact that this doesn't happen more often actually is kind of, pseudo curious too, right? Yeah. So it's not nefarious to me. I mean, because the big thing with goaltenders nowadays is it's the lateral movement, right? It's the east to west, it's the right to left, left to right. It's those strong pushes because essentially that's where the offense is being driven from, is how can we get the goaltender move left to right? Because again, goaltenders these days, they're huge. Dominic Bazzi's 6'6". When he's in his butterfly, his shoulders are covering the freaking crossbar. And
it's usually not even left or right. It's almost this diagonal move because a lot of goaltenders, they're taught to push off to one post and then they'll essentially, their momentum will bring them into the post on the other side. And then they're locking in and then pushing off to get themselves diagonally squared to the shooter who's moving to the middle of the ice. Mm-hmm. And that's where you see it a lot of times too, because the push off is not, if you're pushing off left or right, for example, like you mentioned, it's much harder for the net to come off because you're essentially pushing across the entire length of the frame. Mm-hmm. And the net is like holding itself together or pushing back on itself, versus when you make that diagonal push and you're pushing back out toward the top of the crease, suddenly you're pushing diagonally down towards the back of the net and the diagonal corner of the net. And now all it is you have all that weight behind the goal line to follow through and push along with you and pull that net out of position and pop the net off its mooring. So like you said, Matt Murray, for example, is the guy that I think, a little bit more gamesmanship and that sort of thing. But if you have the pegs wrong, especially, from that diagonal push off where the ice maybe isn't drilled properly or whatever it is that night, and you have that diagonal push off, sometimes it's not even, this goalie is pushing the net off all the time. It's look at the type of push off they're taking off of the net, because sometimes if it's the same motion, the same action as they're trying to set themselves up to anticipate the next shot, that kind of clues you in onto maybe what's going on with that specific mooring or peg, whatever you call them, or the ice conditions, whatever it may be. Or maybe it is a goaltender thing, but how do you police it, like you said? So I think it's a very good point, and something I just thought it'd be interesting to kind of bring it up, because I know some people kind of mentioned that.
It's a moot point in this scenario. It really is.
It didn't cost the Huskies a loss.
No,
it was a lot more than that.
And maybe for the fans out there who are wondering, well, they have skates, why don't you just push off, on the ice with their skates? Well, no, you just don't. That's
just not how it works.
No, especially with how fast the game is, with how the puck movement is much faster on the offensive side. If you're not using that kind of leverage on the post, you're not getting over in time. It just ain't going to happen.
Fun fact, by the way, for those who, maybe are newer to the game of hockey, watch a warm-up in a lot of hockey games at the higher levels and look at the bottom of the post. They have those rubber coverings there. It's there for that specific reason, because goalies are practicing their push-offs, but they don't want to ruin their edges or whatever it may be. So, so there's another reason why as well. Saturday, 4-0 victory for the Huskies. Attendance was 5,103. Of course, Matt Cullen's jersey retirement, number 9, headed to the rafters, not in sequential order, on the right side of Brett Hedikin's 24. I know some people were kind of annoyed about the OCD of that. I don't know.
It's CDO. That's alphabetical order. Get it right.
But with that being said, beautiful ceremony, great recognition. It was great to hear him on the broadcast. Mark Parrish there as well too. And I thought it was, very fitting. Of course, Matt Cullen with Cully's kids and those sorts of things that he's done, obviously giving back to the university, of course, but also, locally in Moorhead and, giving back to the game of hockey at the youth level, I think just has been fantastic to see. So,
and his newfound position, he's with the Fargo Force, player development. So Nick Oliver, former Husky assistant coach. So a couple of Huskies in, sort of the junior ranks with some developing of young kids. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've got a buddy who came back and skated with us over the summer that plays for the Force this year. And he kind of talked about Nick Oliver and kind of talked about his intensity, but also he likes to have a little bit of fun too. And I think he said he's a real players coach and really knows how to identify with the players, as a coach. And I think that's something that Nick always has had, but really maybe a little bit more serious when he was on the recruiting side of things as an assistant at St. Cloud. And I think now maybe bridging that gap as a head coach a little bit, knowing that, a lot of these guys, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, trying to develop and get to the next level. So Brayson Bozer is the player's name, by the way, is a defenseman, number 25. And their leading scorer in Fargo, by the way, is certainly tearing it up too. So definitely worth a look to the stat sheet there. Saturday's game, like we mentioned, the Huskies getting goals. Zach Okabe in the first period, Joey Molinar and Yami Krannila telling us this. Joey Molinar quietly has been productive this season, been pretty impressed with him. Kyler Kupka's 7th of the season in period number 3, just before the 10-minute mark. Grant Cruikshank the assist. Cruikshank then scoring his 15th of the season from Micah Miller and Kyler Kupka, and then Yami Krannila, the empty netter, his 11th of the year. Brendan Bushy, Zach Okabe tallying assists. Of course, Micah Miller tallying a point in this one. He was the one who actually took the shot that knocked Umberco's mask off in the previous game, and then Umberco came back to play in this one. Shots 27 aside. It was a pretty even hockey game, all things considered. 7-6 for St. Cloud in the first, 5-5 in period number 2, and 16-15 for CC in period number 3. So it's interesting how hockey works, right? CC 0 for 4 on the power play. St. Cloud missed their lone opportunity. Much better in the faceoff dot for the Huskies, who came in here 34 for 58, so just under 60% in night number 2. Dominic Bassi was perfect, and Caden Umberco stopped 23 of 26 for an 8.85. But, you look at a game like this, and statistically, you would say, oh, maybe this is one where CC probably could have won this one just based on the statistics and the pace of play of the game. But St. Cloud probably had the better chances in night number 2, even though the shots were way even. Think about it. The Huskies put up 44 shots in the first night. and only scored 2 goals. So credit CC for their lockdown defense. But overall, I think if you're the Huskies, you're disappointed you don't take more points. But I think this is a real wake-up call. CC has always been tough at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center too. But I think this is a real wake-up call as, CC has kind of made the rounds now with a lot of these teams in the NCHC. This Tigers team is back to being a good hockey team again. And I think we'd be remiss to not give them the credit that they deserve. They're sitting 4th in the NCHC by a single point here because of the weekend Omaha had. But I mean, if they would have won yesterday, they would have tied St. Cloud for 2nd in the NCHC. Let's talk about that team. And you and I predicted that we expected this Tigers team to make a significant jump. Did we expect it was going to be this big? I don't think so. But right now, they put themselves in a good spot. What is it about this Tigers team that Huskies fans should know, especially taking from the Friday night loss that, yes, the Huskies made some key mistakes, but you got to give credit to the Tigers and how well-oiled of a machine they're becoming.
So let's just go back to a certain coach named Mike Havland, and we'll just leave it at that. Just kidding. But that team was completely different. They were a team that didn't really push. They were a neutral zone trap team. They were opportunistic on offense. They really wanted to essentially force their opponents into mistakes, and they really didn't drive their own possession. They were literally just essentially trying to create some puck luck and then try to take advantage of it. And then comes in Chris Mayotte, former assistant at Michigan, also spent time with the U.S. development team. And he says, no, this is not the way that we can be competitive at this program. So he comes in, and now CC has got offensive talent. They've got pushback. And not only do they have pushback, but they're battling.
Yeah.
They're battling, Noah. I mean, this team isn't just sitting back and looking for mistakes. No, they're forcing mistakes. They're in your face in the neutral zone. And then in transition, they're much better. So they want to counterattack. They want to counterpunch. They're not just going to be someone's punching bag anymore. And this one thing about Chris Mayotte that I think people should know is he reminds me a lot about Nick Oliver in terms of he's a player's coach, but a fantastic human being too. Like just really, really good dude. And I think, you have to credit him a lot of where this turnaround is because he's got this team bought in, and the recruiting is already so much better. Again, he's got Caden Mbarico, who spent time at World Juniors, Hunter McCowan, who's got 14 goals on the season. He's got more on the way. This team is only going to get better, and it all starts from up top. And so I really want to give a credit to Chris Mayotte. I've had a couple of opportunities to interview him. Great dude. And then talking to Brian Yoon, again, the defenseman earlier this year at the NCHC media day, you could see the excitement even on his face where it's like, hey, we're building something here and we feel like we can make a statement, and halfway through they are. And so you got to give him credit. In fact, one thing we haven't talked about, Noah, and this is a side note, is the way CC made the Huskies play on Friday. There were some wholesale lineup changes to St. Cloud, and one that I was disappointed to see, but not surprised, beating me out and getting 4th line minutes yesterday.
Yeah.
But needed to, because you talked about 50-50 battles. That's been the one thing to his game that just is really not developed. And to me, at this point, when you're a junior, that's not a teachable thing. That's not. And what I mean by that is he's been told.
It's a work ethic thing, it's an accountability thing. You have to be better around your teammates. And CC, of course, their non-conference left a lot to be desired, swept by St. Lawrence and ASU. But other than that, conference-wise, they've beaten Duluth. They beaten Miami. They lost to St. Cloud, were swept, but then they beat Duluth again, swept Omaha, which is a big deal for them. And then, of course, just split with St. Cloud. Now, who do they have coming up? They haven't seen Western Michigan. They have them next weekend. Really, you look at CC, they have a tough schedule in the second half, but they also control their own fate with people around them. They have Western, followed by a home and home against Denver, followed by a travel to Omaha, and then travel to Kalamazoo at Western again. They're at home against North Dakota, and they finish with a home and home against Denver. So really, every team except for North Dakota right now is right around them in that mix, and they have a chance to really push the issue. And if they want home ice, they have a chance to get it done with opponents directly around them. So let's take a look here. Standings here, by the way, Denver, a great weekend for them, obviously, 29 points, 6 points ahead of the Huskies. So I think if you're St. Cloud, looking ahead to next weekend against Denver, got to take 4 points for sure, if not 5 or 6, to really have a shot at the Penrose here. So you're going to have a good weekend against the Pios, which maybe they're a little vulnerable after the weekend against Fairbanks, but, and maybe playing Miami too. Maybe they're not geared up and ready for a high octane opponent like the Huskies still are. So St. Cloud has a chance. Omaha and Colorado College both at 6-5-1 in the conference. Omaha one extra point with an overtime loss compared to CC. So that's the extra point at 21 versus 20. That's your home ice teams right now. Western Michigan right behind at 19 after a good weekend against North Dakota for them. Duluth is in 6th at 13 points. They are a full weekend behind Western Michigan. North Dakota at 12, a full weekend plus 1. And Miami 4 points behind at 7. Denver, St. Cloud, Omaha, Colorado College, Western Michigan, Duluth, North Dakota, Miami. Exactly like we predicted it, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Oh my God. Like I was just looking at this. I'm like, this is unbelievable. Like,
yeah. I mean, it's crazy how college hockey can be sometimes, right, Noah? North Dakota, and again, it maybe is just because we've watched this team and we know what's there. Granted, they were missing Tyler Clevin also yesterday because of a suspension. But it's like when they're scoring, they can't keep the puck out of the net. Yeah. And then when they can't score, they still can't keep the puck out of their own net.
Yeah, they're not getting great goaltending. Their defensive structure has been lapsed. The forward groups, like you said, there's been scoring, but there really hasn't been a huge cohesion. Like I said, who do you look at on North Dakota? I mean, maybe there's a line here and there, but really, who do you look at as a line for North Dakota that you go, yep, I'm terrified of them every night? I don't think they have one this year.
Not really, and a couple of names that have really not risen to the occasion. First of all, the sophomore Matteo Constantini, who was a force last year. He's having that really deep sophomore slump. And again, I know Brad Berry's addressed that too, where, he's got to work through it. That's all you can do. And then Reese Gaber too, who has always been a thorn at everybody in the NCHC side, just doesn't seem to have as, that lethal, impact on the game as he has been in the years past. So, but again, North Dakota is young this year. Again, the loss of Jake Sanderson doesn't help them on the back end. So, take advantage of it while you can, because if this is sort of that blip year for them, great, because it's not going to happen next year. Well,
you talk about guys like Reese Gaber, right? Part of the thing with North Dakota hockey is, yes, they had some good players, but they all work together within a system. Now some of these veteran guys are having to carry the mail, and it might be a little bit too much for them, or they're, being shadowed too much by other teams, and the young guys haven't been able to contribute as much as they had hoped. So, yeah, as a Huskies fan, not complaining though. North Dakota will host Duluth next weekend. So really, if there's a split there, they could really go absolutely nowhere, so to speak, for both of those teams. Miami travels to Omaha. Western Michigan travels to Colorado College. That's, again, a tough matchup for the Tigers. And Denver will travel to St. Cloud State. The Huskies could really use a couple of regulation wins. It's going to be an uphill battle. What do we expect from Denver?
You're going to expect a team that has carried the load all season long, right? They've been in the top 5 all season. They have a very potent offense, as we've seen, 14 goals against Miami, and defensively too. They're starting to figure that out a little bit too. Now, this is probably going to sound really mean, but Miami is certainly not, the most imposing team on the offensive side of things.
I would say they're the one team in the NCHC that looks a little out of place this year. Yeah, compared to everybody else, but
exactly. But Denver's still a very balanced squad. They're deep as far as their lineup's concerned. They still get decent goaltending, from their net minding. So they're going to play a literal identical mirror image of themselves. And again, it's just going to be about managing puck situations, winning those 50-50 battles. And again, if you can try to keep them in their own defensive zone, get pucks below the goal line, and just try to outwork them, that's how you get a win against Denver. Really, it's how you do it.
Number 4 and number 5 in the pairwise. St. Cloud dropping 2 spots after Friday night's loss. Denver right ahead of them, looking for that number 1 spot, both in the NCHC and, of course, in the NCAA pairwise. Minnesota atop the pairwise, followed by Quinnipiac, Penn State. We've heard that story before. Ohio State right behind in 6 with BU right there. Michigan at 8. Harvard at 9, Western at 10, which is intriguing because they don't hold a home spot in the NCHC right now. They're at 5. in the NCHC, 10 in the pairwise. Merrimack dropping down to 11. Michigan State at 12. Like I said, this Spartans team, their non-conference schedule has helped them. Michigan Tech right there with them. Cornell, Mankato at 15. Providence rounding out your top 16. BC, Notre Dame, Yukon, Alaska Fairbanks at 20, followed by Omaha at 21. UMass is still at 23 somehow, with North Dakota right next to them. Bemidji State at 28 for your Minnesota schools. Colorado College right there at 29. Your Wisconsin buddies are at 33 still. Of course, they only played the U.S. under-18 team, so they probably haven't really moved. Duluth at 36. Miami at 44. Huskies fans paying attention. Really, if you're a Huskies fan, you would like Miami to knock off Omaha, this weekend. That would be a big deal, or at least take one of two in that one. So any other pairwise stuff you felt like you wanted to discuss here, Nick?
I think, watching Bemidji State too, they looked like they were kind of on the rise. They've had a couple of tough weekends, so now they slid back to 28 when they were as high as 19, I think, 2 weeks ago. So you talk about some of those blemishes that the Huskies have had against a couple of those squads. You'd like to see those guys rebound to try to get yourself up a little bit. But again, can't control it. You can only control your own destiny. So that starts this weekend again with Denver.
Women's hockey here, moving over to the WCHA. Of course, women's hockey back in action. Before we get to that, though, the Under-18 World Championships have been taking place here. I want to make sure I pull this up because I had this linked. This game still says live. Let me make sure that it is over. I don't know if it is. I checked.
It was 4-0 U.S. over Finland in the bronze medal.
Yeah, maybe I have to refresh the page. I included the link, but maybe I have to refresh. For whatever reason, it doesn't want to give me the score. But yes, the U.S. playing in the bronze medal game, like you mentioned. Here it is. 5-0 was the final for the U.S. over the Finns. So they did win bronze in this matchup. The gold medal game is the only one left to be played. We won't have a result for that one, obviously. Canada plays Sweden. How did we get here? Well, the U.S. beat Sweden 6-3. Finland 8-1 and lost to Canada 3-1 in Group A. So all the teams from Group A advanced: Canada, Finland, Sweden, and the U.S. And the top two teams in Group B, which was Czechia, who went 3-0, and Slovakia was 2-1. So the Swiss and Japan were forced to the relegation round, and the Swiss swept Japan. So the Swiss will stay. Quarterfinals, the Finns beat Czechia 3-2, and Sweden beat Slovakia 6-1. Then the U.S. lost in overtime to Sweden, who they had beat by 3 in the prelims, and Canada beat Finland in overtime 3-2 to get to this point. So pretty intriguing little tournament there. So the U.S. getting bronze, similar to what they did on the men's World Junior side. But WCHA women here, Wisconsin traveling to Ohio State, and it was the Buckeyes, a sweep, 2-1 in overtime and 5-0 against Wisconsin. Like I said, St. Cloud is now sitting in 6 with a matchup against Wisconsin if the playoffs started today. I don't know that the Huskies necessarily wouldn't want Wisconsin right now.
No,
they have not looked great. Granted, Ohio State's a very good team, probably one of the best in the country. But with that being said, Wisconsin has struggled as of recent. Bemidji State traveling to Duluth, and Duluth outscoring them 13-1 over the weekend. St. Thomas traveled to Minnesota, and the Gophers 5-0 and 4-1. Actually, a pretty decent little showing for the Tommies compared to what I anticipated it might have been. But this one hurts. St. Cloud traveled to Mankato, actually. Mankato winning 3-1 and 4-1, respectively. The Huskies needed at least one of these to stay pat. They flip-flopped in the standings as a result of this and really kind of put themselves out of contention of maybe catching Duluth, I think, heading into the rest of the season here. So,
Duluth, 6 straight, right?
Yeah, they've looked really good. Mankato winning 3-1 on Friday night. Attendance was 287. Also something that drives me nuts. I know this one was in Mankato, but for the home games especially if there's a home and home at the Herbrooks National Hockey Center, make sure you're going out and checking out this women's team. They can use the support for sure. But yeah, so the only St. Cloud goal was actually the first one. Svenja Vogt from Addie Scribner, 1:36 into this one. But then it was all Mankato. Kelsey King, Sydney Langseth, and Claire Budarak with the empty netter there. Shots 25 aside. The Huskies outshot Mankato in the first period, were outshot by 2 in period number 2 and period number 3 for a 25-25 margin. St. Cloud had the lone 2 power plays of the contest and did not capitalize on either, and also lost the face-off battle 20 for 52, 38.5% in the draw, Nick.
Yeah, not good.
Jojo Chobak was good, though, 22 of 24 for a 917, and Lauren Barbaro, 24 of 25 for a 960 on the other side here. Anything you wanted to say, or do we want to move on to Saturday and
Let's go to
encompass
Saturday.
together?
Recap.
Attendance 233, 4-1, Mankato winning this one. Shots 41 to 18.
Yeah.
For Mankato, the Mavs on night number 2, 14-5, 11-7, 16-6 periods respectively. Nobody scoring on the power play. St. Cloud was 0 for 1 and Mankato 0 for 4. So the PK has been, it's interesting. You look at the men's and women's teams, the PK has been literally the cornerstone of this women's team. It's been exceptional the way that their kill rate. Taylor Wemple, Kennedy Bobek, Sydney Langseth, and Madison Mashuga all scoring for Mankato, of course. Taylor Wemple, the former Husky, and then Avery Myers unassisted in period number 1, her second of the season for the Huskies, who were 20 for 49 in the faceoff circle at 40.8%. Sonia Hola stopped 37 of 41 for a 902, not bad considering the shot volume. And Alexa Berg stopped all but one on the 18 she faced for a 944. So, Nick, this St. Cloud team, they dropped to 6. They're at 19 points. Mankato vaulting them from 16 points to 22. Minnesota Duluth ahead of both of them by 11 or more at 33 points. So really, the 5 and 6 spots battling essentially to see who's going to face Duluth versus Wisconsin here. Kind of a disappointing week for the women's team.
It is disappointing, again, because you had control a bit in the situation. Again, you 19 points, 3 up of Minnesota State. Had you have won at least one of them, you would have been at 22, in regulation, and you would have kept Minnesota State in your rearview mirror just for the foreseeable future. But now you drop 2, so you go up 6. You're now, like you said, now in 6th place. So it really is between the Mavericks and St. Cloud now for that 5th spot. And
had a real good shot on Friday. I mean, the game winner came halfway through period number 3 plus an empty netter. I mean, that was a good hockey game, but Saturday's contest was really flat.
It was. And, is it interesting? I know we've talked about this women's team and the strides that they've made, right? And there's still some weekends where, it doesn't seem to click, doesn't seem to get there. But is it good that we're disappointed? Noah, does that mean that our expectations are high? And I think I want to mention that too, because it used to be where we go in these weekends and it didn't matter who we played. And let's just say that the expectations were not great. And now it's like we're kind of complaining that they're losing, I guess, playoffs, not playoff seedings, but, I should say conference standings, kind of positioning.
Middle of the pack teams vying for home ice, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and granted, Duluth has been on a run. I mean, 6-0 their past 6.
It's crazy how 2.5 weeks can completely change things,
So, and at the end of it, this team has still made strides. If there's one thing that, we've continue to say the WCHA, they're still very top happy. Again, Minnesota, Ohio State, Wisconsin. But St. Cloud is making a case that, especially with the leadership under Brian Idalski, that I think they have turned things around. There's no question. Do they need some more consistency offensively? Yes. If you look at the shot totals in period number 2, they just weren't enough. As you mentioned, flat. I think that's a perfect description of what happened in that game, which was not a whole lot offensively. So if they're able to just keep that consistency up, that's the big thing. Again, if they can just continue to work on that, they'll still be a tough out, but good to see that again. And we talked about it a couple weeks ago. They've already matched last year's win total already.
Yeah.
So successful season. I guess, we still want them to continue to move up the ladder. WCHA and college hockey on the women's side too can also be a little chaotic. So, but again, you gotta kind of forget about this disappointing last weekend, and I got to look ahead and try to do what you can with what you got next week.
Bemidji State is 1-17. They'll be the Huskies' opponent in 2 weeks, which is a big weekend for St. Cloud to grab some points there. But of course, next weekend, they'll have Ohio State, who is second right now in the WCHA at 46 points, Minnesota at 47, Wisconsin at 38. They have the potential to be caught by Duluth, actually.
Yes, they do.
Duluth at 33, Minnesota State, Mankato at 22. They're 7-11. St. Cloud at 19 at 6-12 in the conference. Huskies are 13-12 overall. Mankato 13-11 overall. So these two teams really doing battle. Pretty similar groups. St. Thomas with 8 points and Bemidji State pulling up the rear. So what's on tap For the WCHA, Minnesota will travel to Bemidji. Mankato will travel to Wisconsin Saturday, Sunday. So you'd like to see the Badgers maybe come out with a victory there or two. Duluth will travel to St. Thomas. So you'd like to see the Tommies have success because they're still far enough away from St. Cloud that I think the Huskies are safe. But yeah,
Lewis may be on an 8-game winning streak by the end of the weekend.
We'll have to see. St. Thomas, an okay showing against the Gophers, though, so we'll see if they can have some magic. That's a Saturday-Sunday matchup as well. And then Friday, Saturday, Ohio State visits the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center at home. This OSU team is very good. Huskies have their work cut out for them here.
They do.
I'd like to see them. I would say a successful weekend, taking any points for sure, but I would say if you can take one win, that would be certainly a very successful weekend. They have the ability to do it. They've shown it against these high-end teams in the WCHA, but Ohio State, they saw them in weekend one of the WCHA gauntlet, essentially, and was not pretty for this team. So curious to see how they handle the Buckeyes, if they can handle them at all. But anything that you feel about this team as they prepare for a really tough test?
Well, and again, we talk about how this team has grown. So what have you, as far as the team, you're looking yourself in the mirror, what sort of improvements have you made since week one? Again, I was up there calling those games against Ohio State. And as you mentioned, they weren't pretty. And it reminded us there's still work to be done. But also there were at times where you look and say, okay, this team is looking better structurally, again, on the breakout, offensively. But can they execute, right? And I think that's the big thing. Can St. Cloud execute some of those things offensively? Because defensively, at times, do they get hemmed in? Yes. At times, do they maybe get a little discombobulated, disorganized? Sure, that's any hockey team. But can you take advantage of your offensive opportunities? That's where St. Cloud has to be better. Going back to October, now into January. So we'll see what they can do. Ohio State's also improved. So it'll be a good, shall we say, litmus test as to where they have been since the first week of the season and now to midway point. So I'd be curious to see what they do.
Of course, it is a home and home for men and women. 3:00 on Friday, 2:00 Saturday for the women's program. So if you like a weekend of hockey, there's your opportunity. Heading down south to St. Paul, well, not really. They're on the road. The Minnesota Wild here. We take a look at the NHL gauntlet here. Had a pretty decent little week, 4-3 shootout loss against the Rangers, then victories against the Islanders and Arizona, 3-1 and 2-1 respectively. Now 24-14-4 with 52 points. They have a plus 16 goal differential, so that improved by 2 over this week compared to last. They are 5-3-2 in their last 10, but Colorado was 1 point back of Minnesota with a game in hand last Tuesday morning. They are now 7 points back as of recording with a game in hand. So Minnesota doing a very good job taking care of business last week. They will be on a pretty lengthy 4-game road swing. They will head to Washington on Tuesday, Carolina on Thursday. That'll be a tough test.
Oh, yeah.
And Florida on Saturday. And then they'll also be in Tampa next Tuesday before coming home on Thursday to face the Flyers. So you look at this Minnesota Wild team. By the way, All-Star voting ends in a couple days, January 17th. So Kirill Kaprizov is in, but if you want other Wild players to be in, go check that out as well. But this Wild team kind of staying pat, trending in the right direction. The Rangers game left a little bit to be desired, but good bounce back wins in their last two. Anything you want to mention about the Wild?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, the Rangers game was a bit disappointing, just in the sense that I thought that they weren't as crisp in that game. And holy cow, that first line for New York, yikes! And with Adam Fox in the blue line, the things that he can do, he's disgusting. We'll spread that one. But that worries me a little bit because I was at the home opener against the Rangers, and that was was an ass kicking to say the least. But you kind of wonder still, the defensive side of things have improved, but still with some of those really high-skilled type teams that have, and the Rangers, to me, they're a deep team, but they're not like a scary deep team because they sort of had their ups and downs too since the beginning of the season when a lot of teams thought that they would be in a much better position. They're still doing okay. Yeah. They're still third in the Metropolitan Division with 55 points. So, they're still having a decent look, but it goes to show that
pretty much comparable to Minnesota.
Yeah, pretty comparable. Yeah. But it does show that sometimes the Wild against these, skilled lines, they can get hemmed in quite a bit. And if there's anything that I took away from that is, towards the end of the game where New York was really pushing, that Zibanejad, Kreider was out with injury at that point. But who does was Zibanejad, and who else was it? Panarin, yeah, and then Adam Fox, and then who they slide up? Was that Hedel that slid up
Philip
a couple
Hedel,
times?
yep.
Yeah, that's a nasty combination, and they really gave Wild fits trying to get out of their own zone. So that's the one curious piece for me. But again, like you said, I thought they rebounded in a nice gritty one against the Islanders. That there was not a lot of room for anything in that game. So happy with it, but still hold concerns defensively as they move forward against some of these more skilled opponents: Tampa Bay, Carolina, Washington, just to name a few. In Florida, although that they've been stumbling, they still have some pretty decent talent down there. So this is going to be a very important road test to try to clean some things up in front of the goaltending.
Kirill Kaprizov sits 13th in the NHL in points with a +1 goal differential, 25 goals, 27 assists, 52 points in 42 games. Also interesting, Erik Karlsson is -4, but he's 7th on this list at 56 points. Just shows how good of a season he has had and how terrible San Jose is.
Yep.
Connor McDavid leads the league with 83 points in 45 games.
Stupid.
You know what's even more stupid? What do you think Connor McDavid's goal differential is?
Goal differential?
Like his plus minus.
Well, it's Edmonton, so it can't be that good. +10?
+3.
Oh.
Imagine having 83 points. I'm sure a lot of them come on the power play, but yeah.
Too, yep.
The best statistical leaders in your top 10, Jason Robertson for Dallas at +25, David Pastrnak at +20. No surprise there.
Austin,
so Austin Matthews is at 17 at +18, by the way, too. Elias Pettersson is +11, by the way.
If there's one player that I would give multiple first-round picks for to trade for, it'd be Elias Pettersson for Vancouver.
Why do the Wild need a center?
They need a couple centers. But just what he can do with the puck, the time and space he creates, he still can shoot the puck. He's a great distributor, and if anything, defensively there's still something to be desired in his game, but offensively, man, and the power play, he can quarterback a power play pretty damn well for the Canucks. And we'll be talking more Vancouver here in a little bit, so we'll come for that for later.
The only other point per game player for the Wild, Matt Zuccarello, 44 points in 40 games played. Eriksson Ek, 33 in 42. Looking to see if there's anybody else that is a point per game player.
Really good lately too, Eriksson Ek. Holy cow.
Due to injury, there is not one. Interesting, the defensive core. We'll talk about this too, but Alex Goligoski has become a true seventh defenseman for the Wild here. So something that we maybe kind of anticipated a little bit. But yeah, the Wild obviously have to take care of business here. Have a good chance here. I think they could do a little bit of damage on this road swing. I mean, it's not out of the question. Carolina will be a tough test, but Washington has not had the greatest of seasons. Florida, like you mentioned, has been up and down. So the Lightning will be a tough test, but the Wild handled them last week. So should be interesting. That will be at Amalie, of course.
Cannot win in St. Paul, but on the flip side, Minnesota can also not win in Tampa either. So it's been kind of a home team cold serve in that series as of recent history.
Yeah, so that will be at Amalie, of course, the future site of this year's Frozen Four here in the college hockey world as well, too. So with that being said, that will do it for the main portion of the show. We'll head on to our extra ice session where we will talk about the Vancouver Canucks, like you mentioned, and also some more Minnesota Wild stuff, including a guy by the name of Matt Dumba. And welcome into the Extra Ice session. Nick Maxon with myself, Noah Grant, here on the Huskies Warming House Podcast, episode 145 here. And, let's stick with the Minnesota Wild at least to start, because that's who we were just discussing here. Rumors, both Edmonton and Ottawa seeking a little bit of interest in Matt Dumba at least. And we talked about Matt Dumba being a serviceable enough defenseman where if you get him at $2.5 million a year, he's still worth the money after this season. Of course, will be a UFA after this year, his contract finally up. And, is he a guy that you think, is a trade deadline trade bait? I'd like your percentages here. Yeah. What is the percentage that Matt Dumba, essentially, it's going to be a three-way percentage here. So this might test you a little bit. Trade deadline, walks in free agency, stays with Minnesota via re-signing in free agency. What are your percentages?
Trade deadline, less than 1%.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, think about it. If Edmonton's calling, why would you help out a potential Western Conference foe that's also got Stanley Cup aspirations?
Simple answer, because you lose him for nothing otherwise.
You know what? At this point, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that, because it doesn't mean you lose him for nothing, because that's also assuming he doesn't re-sign.
And that's what I want to know, your next percentage there. But also with that, the other talk is the other reason you don't trade him is because Alex Goligoski has not been serviceable enough in that 7 defenseman role to be a mainstay in the lineup and elevate somebody.
Exactly. You need
So
him. You need him.
yeah, and I don't disagree.
So
But how much do you think you can re-sign him versus is he going to walk in free agency?
That's interesting because now that there's
you've got 99% left, by the way.
oh, good. Now that there's teams that have discussed interest, that you see, here's my thing though. He's not going to the trade deadline if you're in a playoff position. If the Wild were more of a bubble team or they're struggling to be in a playoff spot, I think the conversation's different, right? The Ottawa Senators maybe makes sense. But again, it depends on the return. You need a serviceable defenseman in return. Now, what's been hugely laughable is the rumors of Jacob Chychrun and the Wild having interest. That's a complete and total farce. I don't know who the hell is spreading that line of shit around. I hate to say it that aggressively, but it's totally terrible. The Wild do not have the assets to get them, to want to give up those assets. Remember, we're going to have $14 million in dead cap the next 2 years, and you need first round picks. And Arizona wants first round picks plus young prospects in that trade. You don't have that, nor can you afford to give that up. So the Wild have zero interest in Jacob Chychrun. I'm putting that to bed, so shut up.
Alrighty then.
I know, right? But to me, it's more of like 49-50. For him to walk or to. And here's the thing: after the season, you can still trade him. He's still under your control until July 1. So it's not like you can't trade him. Look at the Alex DeBrincat trade, right? Chicago got it before the trade deadline. So you can still make a deal happen. Now, at the end of it, the free agency market for a second pairing or third pairing defenseman, you can replace that in free agency. I'm not saying that you want to, but you have opportunities there if it comes down to that. At the end of it, you still have Alex Goligoski under control for another year. So even if it's there, okay, fine, right? So I'm not as concerned about Dumba going in that sense. There's no way to me that Bill Guerin makes a move on Matt Dumba before the end of the season. To me, it just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense.
So let's say Billy Guerin gets hit on the head and doesn't make sense, according to you. I'm just that's just to set up the question here. If you're a playoff team that is looking for a push and wants Matt Dumba, you want him badly, what kind of offer would be acceptable for Minnesota to listen to?
It's a great question. You need a serviceable defenseman in return, one, and then probably at least a second round draft pick. Yeah. Honestly, I mean, that to me is where you're at because you got to replace him. Again, he is a mainstay in your lineup. He's eating 16 to 20 minutes a night. You can't just give him up for futures. And especially with the Wild's, cap situation, you have to. Now, again, I know everybody knows the cap situation. We know that $6 million comes off of the board at some point next season in some capacity, right? But that is what you need, somebody in return that is at least going to be able to eat up those minutes and also is going to be able that you would probably feel comfortable re-signing too, right? Because at the end of it, you're going to have somebody with shorter term you feel comfortable re-signing. There's just a lot of moving parts there. But more importantly, Noah, let's flip the question a little bit. Why is a playoff team currently third in the Central? You got a 7-point cushion on next place Colorado. Why would you give up assets in this situation?
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And I was just kind of trying to take a look at teams that maybe would make sense. I was looking at Detroit, for example. For example, Detroit has like Ole Mata in the same situation, 28 years old. He's 2.25 mil, and he's going to be a UFA after this season. So I think a lot of other teams are going to be in a similar boat. And that's the thing. It's like, if you're the Wild and you lose Matt Dumba, would you take a guy like Ole Mata? Does he deserve a look? You know what I mean? So
there's a look, but here's the thing, let's go back to the Martin Hansel trade and the Ryan White trade, because it really became about the Ryan White trade after it's all said and done. Making a trade that, and essentially why I'm bringing that up is you made a trade you didn't have to make, right? Yeah. You essentially, told the hockey community that my chips are all in. I'm trading for Martin Hansel. I get Ryan White, even though Ryan White was actually the better performer in that trade. But you didn't have to, though. The locker room was fine. The team was good. You made a move for the sake of making a move. And I think a lot of the chatter surrounding Matt Dumba, especially mid-season, is a move that they don't have to make. And I think if you were to ask Billy Guerin, he would say the same thing. Look, I don't need to do it, right? Now, if Matt Dumba's game has fallen off a cliff, again, we talked about Goligoski. You mentioned he's shown to be, like I said, a true seventh defenseman. He's been seen more of the press box, right? Mason Shaw too now has been sort of the unlucky forward in that same discretion. So what do you do with Mason Shaw, right? There's a lot of questions here, but they're questions that you don't have to act on right this second. So they're in a good position. To me, these are situations where you deal with after the season's done and not mid-season. Matt Dumba is not going anywhere before the end of the year.
Listen, I get it. You want Anthony D'Angelo at 2 years left, or 1 year after at $5 million, because he's a great character guy. I understand. I get it.
I want Oliver Ekman-Larsson because he's got that contract that you can give him for another 5 years. That's what I want. I want stability, man.
You want control.
I want control. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the Vancouver Canucks, our last topic of the show today. Well, let's talk about a guy first of all. Let's break this down. A guy by the name of JT Miller.
JT mother. Yeah.
Yeah. You just like to make me edit this. I had to edit out your bombs last week, and I got to do it again. Now I got to write the timestamp here. I'll
keep them low. I'm sorry.
Kids. So it's interesting on the other side of things too, is that, JT Miller really came to light when he essentially smacked the back of the net when he was waiting for the netminder, who had to come back into
right?
had to come back in the net because the Canucks were back in their own zone, which is pretty par for the course.
He himself skated the puck back and was essentially trying to use the goaltender to get the extra skater to do the break. It's like, no, there
was a lot of talk about the back check he had against Calgary. I don't know that one was as egregious because he was so far behind the play that he's really not going to be a factor there. But there was another back check in the last game. I forget who was it. Winnipeg that they were playing. No.
Right.
Wait, who were they playing? Why do I feel like it wasn't Winnipeg? Anyway, it was essentially Tampa. That's who they were playing, I think.
Tampa. No, you might be right here. I'll try to grab the scores. How about that?
Yeah, and essentially it was a 2-on-1 where he was supposed to pick up for sure the third trailer, but the defenseman didn't come with, and he essentially was in no man's land, not helping out at all, back checking there, and ended up in the back of the net. So this JT Miller contract for 7 years and just over $50 million does not kick in until
next
season. So he sounds like a bit of a head case in this Vancouver locker room, which does not help compared to everything else that's going on in Vancouver. But starting there, what is this conundrum with JT Miller, who really, when he came into the league, was kind of touted as this third line guy who worked hard and kept his mouth shut and earned his opportunity? What is the deal here? Is there a bit of entitlement, feeling like, now he's getting on a big boy contract here, or Vancouver also sucks? Like what's the deal here?
I think it's a bit of both, because you got to remember he kicked in the league with the New York Rangers, who then subsequently traded him, and that kind of shocked the hockey world. And then, he's part of Tampa, and then he's again shipped off to Vancouver. Why do I bring that up? I think there's some underlying things there that have always kind of been with him. And when you're in a program such as the Vancouver Canucks, and you're not having the success, sometimes those negative aspects get amplified, right? Did the Wild, I'll admit, I wanted JT Miller as a center because of, he was putting up points, and now with some of the things that have come out in terms of his supposed leadership, if that's what you want to call it, it's been a real negative look for him and the organization. So, like you said, it's stuck for 7 years too. And with the flat cap that we know it, there's no way to move that contract either. They're stuck with that one. It's like a Travis Green all over again. Oh my gosh. So
yeah, go ahead.
I don't know. And just it's disappointing more than anything, because I get it. When you're a professional athlete, and especially last year they pushed, Bruce Boudreau came in and that team was on the rise. They were doing better. It was just a little bit too late for them. And then this year they didn't carry over to this season. And he's a guy that wants to win, right? He's a guy that you can say, okay, there's passion there. He's just trying to win games. But, when you're slamming your stick, you have the look like you're not back checking on a play. You're yelling at your own goaltender, hey, get the hell off the ice, even though I'm making the play back towards the net, which is not the way hockey works the last time I checked. But, it just seems like he's kind of become a pariah more than anything, and not a true leader. Now, granted, we don't know everything that happens, behind closed doors, but the way that the perception is that he's not necessarily the guy that you're going to on the bench for, a lot of good heart-to-heart talks. We'll put it that way.
Well, you look at Vancouver, they're at 37 points. Essentially, to catch a wild card, they would need 14 points to even be in the conversation. So it's not looking great for them.
No,
They
they're out of
are
it.
they are third to last in the Pacific, so they've really slipped as of late. Quinn Hughes made some interesting remarks about Tanner Pearson's third hand surgery in about 2.5 months span here.
I've got some comments on that.
saying that it was mismanaged, and interestingly enough, the Canucks put out a statement today that they were investigating the handling of their own player. That kind of sounds like the whole Boston Bruins Mitchell Miller thing. But you thought Quinn Hughes' comments were a little interesting. Did you think they were off base, on base?
Here's the thing we don't know, and that's the thing is the assumption is when a player says that's mishandled, the assumption is that's a Canucks problem. Who the hell knows if Quinn Hughes knows what the hell he's talking about? Here's why I say that. You're in the medical field. I happen to know a few people that work in the medical field, and let's just say that this was a surgical problem. Let's just say that he had a surgery and then the surgical team, screwed up and there was an infection.
So the second one was actually as a result of that. It ended up being where the wound didn't heal properly and had a bit of a minor infection. So they had to essentially reopen it. And okay, this is getting a little bit technical, but when wounds heal, sometimes you like to leave them open or you want to preserve what's called granulation tissue. And then when wounds aren't healing properly, so they get that granulation tissue gets infected, you have to decide, can we handle this infection and save that granulation tissue to let it do its job and create scars or healing, how it would heal normally? Or do you essentially kind of dig that all out and redo the surgery and take everything out and redo it again? So,
yeah. So to my thing is, I think the Vancouver Canucks in this situation are being kind of misproportionate and blamed for this. And I again, we don't know, but I would say that it's curious. I think the Canucks were kind of forced to put out a statement because again, everybody's in a box, right? The hyper focus is, oh, wait a minute, this is obviously the Canucks medical staff or the Canucks training staff, even though they asked Quinn Hughes to clarify that. And I think he even said, I'm not pointing the finger at anyone. But I think what he's doing is simply saying that, okay, he got injured. He's trying to get it fixed. It isn't getting fixed. In fact, there's been all these sidetracks, and I'm pissed for my teammate. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
And again, we don't know everything. And personally, to me, if it were me, I think it has more to do with the surgical team than it is for the Vancouver Canucks, the medical staff. But again, we don't know. I think it's kind of the whole thing's kind of being blown out of proportion, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And I would put my money that this is less of a Canucks training / medical staff issue more than it was the surgical team issue.
Sounds like a lot of just individual issues all around in Vancouver right now. None of which, of course, is hampered by the fact that Bo Horvat is probably out. Brock Besser was almost scratched this season, and now Oliver Ekman-Larsson, with 5 years remaining, including the season at $7.26 million per year, was scratched the other night. Nick, speaking of Oliver Ekman-Larsson's old team, dare I say, I would almost maybe want to be in Arizona right now.
The way that things are transpiring in Vancouver, you're not wrong. You're not. And in fact, come May, Arizona might be awarded a brand new, arena facility, or we may change that and say, oh crap, they struck it down. And then we're back to Vancouver being the second to worst, burning dumpster fire in the NHL.
And I know that this draft class is supposed to be decent, but the thing that really bites for Vancouver is, even though they had a poor start to the season, they had a decent little middle half for their last couple of month and a half or whatever. So tank for Bedard isn't really all that feasible. It's not out of the question, but they're not really in that echelon yet. They'd be picking around 7 or 8 right now.
So, because you can only move up 4 spots, right? Maximum of 4.
I thought it was 5, but heck if I know.
it's not a ton, right? So
they're not there, is what we're trying to say.
They're kind of like the Houston Texans right now, where they're screwing up their own tank.
Yeah,
literally.
What was the deal with that?
I don't know.
Also, speaking of football, by the way, because we're excited about the Vikings, and hopefully we're talking about them next week in a good way. But how about the comeback by the Jags last night, by the way, too? Wow. Holy smokes.
How do you throw 4 interceptions and win a playoff game? That's insane.
Like that. What's interesting? Yeah. They talked about how the Jags starting QB has never lost on a Saturday, college, NFL. I'm just saying.
Meaningless, but okay. We forgot one thing though with Vancouver.
Unless you play on a Saturday, but okay.
That's true. But we forgot about another thing with Vancouver. Bruce Boudreau, Elliot Friedman saying that there will be a coaching change and they expect Rick Tocchet to be the replacement. A lot of people are giving Elliot Friedman crap for this. I almost said it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I caught myself there.
OEL needs a little help from his buddy, right? Phil Kessel's coming with, right?
Probably. No, he's not. It's interesting because it's like, what do you want Elliot Friedman to do? If his sources are telling him these things, his job is to report it. He's not the one that's leaking the information, right? So as a reporter, you're going with what's been told to you.
Would you like to open up a can of worms on this show to finish the show out?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so this has nothing to do with NHL hockey. We're going to go back to the NAHL.
Okay.
So Chase LaPinta for the Minot Minotauros, by the way, this is a crash course in journalism and media reporting, which of course
Sure.
Nick and I know. So Chase LaPinta and Hunter Longy are both on point streaks. Hunter Longy actually just set a Toro record last night for longest consecutive.
Isn't he second in the league in scoring too?
He is.
Yes.
And just he has 25 points in 15 games. He might be the first Toro to hit 60 points.
That's good.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. AIC commit, by the way, for those who are wondering. So his point streak was on the line, and he tallied a point in the game prior on Friday night. Chase LaPinta had 13 goals in 10 games. Had he scored the night before, he ended up scoring on Saturday, but had he scored on Friday, he would have tied the NAHL record for consecutive games with a goal, right? Would have been 11 games with a goal. So about 5 games prior to this, Ken Oda, who of course does a really good job as my play-by-play guy in Minot, has been there for 11 seasons out of the 12 Toro seasons. And he talked about essentially he went and did his own personal digging. So the NAHL essentially statistical modern era, StatCast, whatever you want to call it for the null, has been around since 2004. So he went back since the inception of the modern statistics and looked who had these consecutive game point streaks and compiled all of these streaks together manually and found that after like 6 or 7 games in a row with a goal, Chase LaPinta was inching up on some of these records. He has the Toro record, but was inching up on league records since 2004. The record was set by a guy from Bozeman, who now no longer has an NA team, has an NA3 team instead. Mm-hmm. And kind of a no-name guy that had this consecutive point streak, your goal streak record. So we started talking about it on the air that Chase LaPinta, another goal, another game, he's continuing to climb up. And finally, he's second in the null and had a chance to tie it on Friday night. So of course, we had started this story based on the great research by Ken manually looking up these records. KX News jumped on the story. The local Minot Daily News jumped on the story and talked about this sort of thing. Of course, Chase LaPinta did not score on Friday. His streak ended 1 game shy of tying the record. He paced the team with 7 shots on goal that night, had 2 breakaways and a wide open net that he was robbed with an errant blocker coming out. I mean, did everything he could have but score in that hockey game. And then, of course, scored the next night. And was, of course, frustrated with himself because that's just who he is in general. High expectations. He's the highest scoring rookie in the null. Arizona State commit, a 2004, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
The kid's an absolute stud. And by the way, he's 5'9", 168, and he's rocking guys who are like 6'3". So it's pretty impressive. But with that being said, after the game, coaching staff, other people in the media, people around the rink on social media, their comment was that we put way too much pressure on him as a media group.
Oh my God.
and I know that was a long entrance to the story, but I made the argument that it's not like he went -2 without a shot on goal. Like, he was electric. He was the best player on the ice and just didn't score. And this perception of the media in general that we've talked about, the sense that, oh yeah, you're going to put pressure on a player from a media perspective. I've never understood that because, it goes back to, what we were just kind of talking about with Vancouver, but it's like, we talked to the players the day after and Chase is like, I didn't feel any pressure. All the players, I didn't feel any pressure. So I'm wondering why there's this perspective also at the NHL level where it's like similar to Elliot Friedman, right? Where he simply reports things he's hearing, and in our case, reporting statistical facts. And
Mm-hmm.
people like to pull this. Why is this the case? I know everybody wants to have a say on Twitter and social media and feel validated, but why is it when media guys, and we clarified this and said, no, Chase LaPinta was electric. He felt no pressure and he ran into a good goaltending performance against Aberdeen. why is it when a guy like Elliot Friedman says the same thing? Why are people so inclined to not believe a guy that has so much experience at the NHL level doing his job? Michael Russo runs into the same thing with people.
Well, yeah, last year was Michael Russo versus Anson Carter. And I remember talking with Russo after that. I know he was, a bit in shambles with that too, getting called out on national television. And for those who know Michael Russo, the allegations that Anson Carter was thrown his way was in no way, shape, or form true to his character or who he is as a player. I will stand behind Russo every day, all day, just because of the person that he is. Not just as a reporter, but the person he is. He's just not the person that he was being painted as by some of those analysts on TNT.
Yeah.
For Elliot Friedman, he's essentially the new Bob McKenzie. Let's just say it, right? Bob McKenzie was the Bob father. He was the guy on TSN for a number of years, in fact, decades, that was sort of the encyclopedia to all things hockey related, all things new. I still remember watching Trade Center back when we were still on, and there were two desks. There was the front desk, James Duthie was there, a couple of other analysts, and then they had the back bench. That was Bob McKenzie, Pierre LeBrun, and a couple, and they're just sitting there typing in their Blackberries. Like, it would literally look like it was a witch's cauldron, and it'd be trade deadline, and they would just blurt out, Zibanejad to New York or something like that. They would blurt out.
And he ended up being the godfather at the draft at the end because he thought, I'll just do this at the end because I know how to do everything else.
So, but the point is that these guys are well connected, right? They know the information, and for Elliot Friedman, who's essentially, he's assumed that role. Again, it's been more so just because of Bob McKenzie's, retirement. He does some things here and there, but he's very much, Bobby Margarita now, as he calls it. Yes, that is actually an actual product. It's a margarita in a can. You can get it in Canada. Yes, try it. I don't care. But Friedman is an integral journalist. He's not just going to blurt out something that he doesn't feel is, one, true, two, he can't bounce off a couple of different other people to make sure that it's right information. And for people who think it's like the media is responsible for this, okay, so you take, let's just go back to your perspective, right? Say that we don't take it out of it. Let's say he misses it, and then someone says after the fact, "Oh, did you know that you were one goal away on Saturday from tying a record?" Does that change his performance?
Right.
No. If Vancouver does make a coaching change, and they do go to Rick Tocchet, right? Does that change the information that's being
exactly
nothing, right?
And
we're just
let's say
we're the messenger, man.
Yeah, and let's say it's wrong. Let's say they do make a coaching change, but it's not Rick Tocchet. So there's a hint of truth and a hint of they wanted to change, but Rick Tocchet wasn't their guy. And then they hire a new guy. Let's say they hire Travis Greenback. Yay, right?
It's not another question with Vancouver.
but let's say this though, and people go, "Oh, Elliot Friedman, look how he lied to us." It might have been, do you know all the things behind the scenes? Maybe Rick Tocchet was the guy, and then they asked Tocchet, and Tocchet said, "Nope.
No."
Yep,
right?
There's
things that change, right?
Yeah.
And it's, and going back to Chase LaPinta, and granted, had a chance to watch him in lineup. He's an electric player. There's no question
disgusting.
about it.
He might be the best player in Toro history besides Blake Lizotte. He's that good.
Yeah, he's fantastic. But the storyline, do the players give a right rear ends about those? No, they don't. No. He cares about scoring, but as a hockey player at that level, again, Chase LaPinta has a future, right? He's an Arizona State commit, D1. He's going to be a good hockey player for the foreseeable future, right?
Yeah.
They don't really care about that. Yeah, they care about scoring. Yeah, the record would be nice, but they're not going to blame the media because the puck didn't go in the net. They're going to say, no, that was just a hell of a save by the goaltender. And like you said, when you're on the ice in that situation, instincts take over. And sometimes as a goaltender, you stick out a pad, the old scorpion kick from Martin Brodeur. That's not, you don't teach that, right? Just I'm just trying to stop a puck.
And hockey goes that way. Of course, the next night he got a backdoor tap in on the power play, right? Just simple. That's the way games go. And it's interesting. We talked about this too. Chase LaPinta, right? Let's say he tears it up at ASU. If he does good there, you know what's going to happen? This crazy thing is going to happen where the media is going to ask him questions and they're going to write about him.
Yes.
No wow. Right.
Cow.
And he's going to be no worse for wear because he's a great hockey player, obviously. So, it's interesting how
they're shooting the messenger, and it's just like, okay, we're not the ones that are moving the pieces, right?
Yeah.
We're just watching the pieces move, or we're being told that these pieces are moving. And we're just telling others that this is what's happening.
Yeah, and the Toros win that game 4-0 with probably the most complete 60-minute effort of the season and the 41st shutout in Toro history, and it's overshadowed by all this brouhaha. And you know what's interesting? Where were all the pundits when he had 7 goals in 7 games? Nobody said anything, but we just started tracking it, and then it was like, oh, look at this. He's continuing to score. Check this out, and just simply relaying the facts. So it's interesting. But factually stating, final thoughts here, the Vancouver Canucks, what is the deal with them? Should we rather be heading to Arizona to at least have some sunshine if we're going to suck at hockey? And lastly, Elliot Friedman's point, Rick Tocchet or not, do the Canucks make a coaching change?
Vancouver is a complicated puzzle, right? Here's what I'll say. The Vancouver Canucks have been avoiding essentially a giant rebuild for a couple of years. I think we all know that. I think it started even back a couple of years ago when even, Brock Besser, before his bridge deal, there were rumors that he was, trade bait. To me, at this point, they just need to do it. They need to blow it up. I think Bo Horvat is out when he does. So why are you laughing?
Well, because you said blow it up, and that was a very throwback to.
Oh, yes, it was.
The Kirill Kaprizov situation.
Yes,
when
I
he
know.
was supposed to get re-signed. Blow it up.
Blow it up. But for real, I think that's where it is. And you can make a coaching change all you want, but it doesn't change the roster that's on the ice. It doesn't change the contracts that you have, especially long-term deals like Oliver Ekman-Larsson. It doesn't change the JT Miller signing. And the cap situation that not only you, but also the league is in, where if you're trying to make sort of a rebuild, it's more difficult now, because if you're trying to get rid of some of these long-term contracts, nobody can pick up these guys. There's nowhere to send them. You could send them to Arizona, but even Arizona might say no. That's how bad it is. Arizona has kind of finally embraced that with their with Doug Armstrong down there in Arizona, where they haven't really tried to tank before Armstrong. Now they're actually we're offloading. I still can't believe Jim Benning pulled away Oliver Ekman. I mean, you can almost, for Arizona, thank Vancouver for taking on Oliver Ekman-Larsson, because they took all of that extra draft, that capital off of their books to be able to really do a deep dive rebuild. They have a ton of picks coming up, and ideally a new place to play here. Hopefully we get some good news if you're a Coyotes fan in May, with, again, that public vote on that entire district there in the Tempe area. So I don't know. I don't know if a coach changes anything. I think they need an entire roster overhaul again. Their captain, Bo Horvat, has been rumored to be on the move. If he goes, there's more likely to follow. I would, and again, they've asked him, is there anybody that's untouchable? And it's the only person that I wanted. Elias Pettersson right now is the only. So that means even Quinn Hughes, if the deal is good enough, could also be on the move. So you could see a full-scale rebuild with Vancouver. That's where I see it. And to me, that's where they've been needed. That's what they've needed, and they've avoided it for a few years.
Yeah, send them to Quebec, right?
Quebec City, yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Team, don't they?
Oh, yeah. And Arizona's headed to Hartford. With that being said, just don't make it Atlanta. With that being said, I think that will do it for the main portion of the show. Men's hockey and women's hockey both at home against Ohio State for the women, Denver for the men. So definitely get to the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. Minnesota Wild, 4-game road swing. Washington on Tuesday, Carolina Thursday, Florida Saturday, and Tampa Bay next Tuesday. With that being said, for Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant. As Nick likes to say, of course, have a wonderful week from the Den. And of course, go Taros.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL!
Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.